This is Breighlynn Polk interviewing Mr. Marc Lee for the HBCU Radio Preservation Project. It is currently 3:06 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday, July 10th, 2024. This interview is being recorded at Queenie's in Durham, North Carolina. Can you first start off by telling me your full name and your relationship to WNCU?
Sure. Name is Mark Sumner Lee, and I actually was involved in some of the early planning when Central was deciding that it was going to get a radio station and all along those lines. So that would have been in like the latter part of the 90s and all in that space. So I was definitely there in some of that early planning, and then I have definitely had a lot of radio background and all along those lines. So I've definitely been involved in radio for a number of years. My folks having started at a community radio station in rural North Carolina back in 1976 that was on for about roughly 11 or 12 years. So that's actually a number of the NCU people were connected to that station as well, including Donald Baker, including Walter Norflett, whose wife was Linda Norflett, the head of the drama department at Central, and a number of other people that were affiliated there as well, and some that still are in the area, like Steve Hyman, that's up in Warren County. But yeah, that's a little bit about my connection. And then I was the probably the second and the one of the longest running blues DJs there, because definitely I had created this whole kind of mantra, or not mantra, but persona, which was Mark the Blues Man Lee, and the members of the Blues Patrol, which were the people that listened to the show. And there were a number of them that were here, like Maurice Darden was one that listened. There was a number of other folks that used to listen on a regular basis, including Lon McCormick and a number of others. So I would oftentimes hear them call and would greet them when they would call in for requests. So a lot of it was Southern blues as well as Chicago-style blues and various other blues styles that existed, because I have always had an interest both in jazz and blues because of my radio station background with my parents. So they definitely, BH, I think it was the first one that got me to do the blues show, and I had that show for a number of years on the station over at NCU.
Thank you for giving us that background. Mm-hmm. So just to go back a little bit before you got involved with the planning for WNCU, can you tell me when, if you're comfortable with telling me when and where you were born and about the people who raised you?
Oh, yeah, no problem at all. I was actually born right here in Durham, North Carolina. My parents were Jim and Valeria Lee, and they are still very much alive and still very much active in a number of things. Dad is a well-known local artist and was actually involved in radio as well, and actually was one of the people connected with Sound and Print United, which was the parent company of WVSP, which was my parents' radio station, and all along those lines. But definitely I had a tremendous amount of influence from my parents. I have a younger brother that's involved in work with at-risk youth, and definitely we have a lot of respect for our parents, and all along those lines, both he and I have that kind of respect. And then I would also say that both sets of grandparents were very influential as well. My mother, Mollie Huston Lee, started the first African-American library in Raleigh, the Richard B. Harrison Library, which still exists and everything. And the biology building at Central is named after my grandfather. So he was James Lee Sr., and my dad has Junior and everything. So definitely that is on Dad's side, and then Mom's side, they were rural folks, but also very much involved in their church. I think that if I remember correctly, Granddad was a deacon, or definitely involved with Pine Chapel and that whole church community and all along those lines, and definitely was involved in agriculture. And the radio station that we had, the tower, was actually on the family property. So I do remember Dad going there, and I think I went there a couple of times, even though Malik's more adventurous, my younger brother, so he probably went more than I did. But I do remember going there because it was on the family property and all along those lines. And Grandma was a cafeteria worker. So she was a cafeteria worker, but also very much involved in the church, in the community up there in Hollister. And ironically, later on in life, even though I was born here in Durham, we spent some time in Greensboro, and I also moved up to Warren County and had my growing up years. Cause I think we moved up there when I was probably around 10 or something like that from Greensboro, and I was there through all of my teenage years and into young adult, because I actually went to school out of state, ironically because of a Durham connection, that being Howard Fuller, who was very much involved in activism here in Durham and all along those lines. But he was also, and now he's very much a charter school pioneer and all along those lines, but he was involved with even the efforts to get more African American studies at Duke, the takeover of the Allen Building, and a number of other things like that, and all along those lines. But he's a family friend, so that's how I got to Marquette. So he definitely had some influence even in my own journalism journey and everything.
Well, thank you. So it seems like your family is very connected either in Durham or at Central.
They have deep connections. I mean, Mom has also done some work in the nonprofit world because she was the first president of the Golden Leaf Foundation, which is some of the tobacco settlement money, and they've even funded some of the projects at Central. Like they funded one of the biomedical buildings over at Central. They funded a number of other programs there as well. So she's definitely did some funding before she retired about I think it was probably like 11, 12 years ago was when she retired, but she's definitely given back to the school that she is an alumni of because she's a Central alumni, and Dad went to school in that area as well. But yeah, they definitely have some strong ties to the area and even in the activism community as well.
So you mentioned that your parents started a radio station in '76. Was that what they primarily did for work, or was there something?
No, ironically, one of the things that I've been doing lately is a podcast network called Pod TV, and part of the reason that I enjoy it is because neither of those two gentlemen, and they come from the European culture, had any background in radio, but they had a passion and felt that a lot of voices weren't being heard, and I could resonate with that because that was part of the reason that my parents started the radio station when they did, because they were, I think DUR had already closed down here in Durham, and that was another station that existed here in Durham. And actually, ironically, I think we got some of our music from that station and all along those lines. But they felt that the African American voice, the Native American voice, the voice of the rural community, and a lot of other things weren't being heard. They also were frustrated because I think DUR had some jazz program, but not a lot of that had phased out. Central wasn't on the air at the time, so they were wanting to give a voice to some music forms that weren't being represented. So jazz was one of those. Blues, which I'm a big fan of, was another one as well. And ironically, people forget that I think it was last year was the 50th anniversary of hip-hop, so there was even a initial hip-hop shows that they started when the station came on. So they started that literally maybe 2 or 3 years after hip-hop had been created in New York, and it was a group of, at that time, teenagers that started a show called Let's Rap, and that literally was the title of the show, but it was kind of like you have your parents that might have known a show called Zoom, which was by teenagers for teenagers. That's kind of what Let's Rap was. So all the DJs were literally teenagers, and I would go up there sometimes and help them with some of their programs as well. So literally I fell into radio because of the background that my parents had in that field.
Thank you. So you said that you grew up in Durham?
I was born in Durham, grew up in Warrenton.
Grew up in, what's the name? I'm sorry.
Warrenton.
Warrenton, thank you. So in Warrenton, can you kind of describe what that community was like for you growing up?
Oh, sure. Warrenton was very much of a rural town. I mean, it's a small rural town in northern North Carolina. I remember that definitely growing up, there was a lot of people that would pick up games of basketball and pick up games of baseball in some of the fields that were out there. It was also a community that when folks were around the fall time, when folks were getting back to school, we actually lived in the city limits, but some of those that lived inside the county would be picking tobacco and doing other things. So there was a part of the year that the school wasn't that packed because a lot of the people were doing the work in the fields, and so they weren't necessarily actually in school, but they would catch up with work once everybody came back into session and all that. And I was involved in a number of different organizations. I remember being on the chess club, and wasn't the greatest chess player, but I just remember being in the chess club, on the newspaper staff, remember being on the debate club, remember being in the drama club, and even though, and I've even talked about it on my own podcast, I was probably the worst track runner that ever existed, but I did run track and tried to at least run track. But one of my skill sets that I even have to this day is being a networker. So I actually kept the team together and recruited a lot of the players from like football and other places, and we won, I think, because you could do it in your senior year in junior high. So it would be like would amount to ninth grade, but that would be in junior high there in Hawkins was the name of the junior high, and then 10th, 11th, and 12th would be our high school years. But you could run 4 of those years, including the ninth grade year, and we won 3 out of the 4 championships. I personally take partial blame for the year that we lost because I got tired of losing. I got tired of finishing in last place. So, late friend of mine, I recruited him because I knew I could beat him. So I recruited somebody that I knew I could beat, and I think we lost by like 2 or 3 points. And we had some folks that had some success in football, baseball, and more football, and I think a little bit in basketball, but they had some success in even going, I think, 1 or 2 into the pros and all along those lines. And we even had one guy that went into sumo wrestling, and unfortunately he passed away not that long ago, Eric Perry. But he was into sumo wrestling. He's also into those bodybuilding kind of contests, like strongest man competitions. So he's from Durham, so he was a Durhamite and everything. But yeah, he was very much kind of what I grew up in that environment.
Thank you. So as far as your community, was it more of like an integrated community when you were growing up, or was it?
No, it was definitely, it was a predominantly African-American population, as I recall it, and definitely the high school was predominantly African-American, but there was definitely mixtures of other races and everything. One of the ironic things in the time that I was going to school in the late 70s, we actually had they tried to diversify the salutatorian and the valedictorian. So like there was a white salutatorian, they would try to have either a black or a Native American valedictorian, and we also had 3 homecoming queens in most of the time that I was there. So I remember there was one that represented the African American community, one that represented the Native American community, because there's an active Native American population there, the Halawa Saponi tribe, and then there was one that would represent the European American community. So I actually knew, I think I knew all 3 of the homecoming queens in my senior year and everything. But yeah, there was a little bit of that. I don't remember a lot of racial tensions. I do remember that was the early period of some of the drug stuff going on. So I do remember like some people that might have gotten high off of like LSD and some other things, and there being some incidences with them. But I don't remember off the top of my head any racial kind of conversations like the way they've been in the 21st century.
Absolutely. So I know that you said your parents, again, they had that radio station in 76, but did you have any earlier memories of radio prior to them starting that station, or was that like your introduction?
That was the introduction to radio. I did have an introduction to TV, ironically, when I was in Greensboro. I can't remember the name of the show. It wasn't it wasn't like the one here, because there was like Teenage Frolics and a number of other ones that are here in Durham that are kind of kid-oriented dance shows, but there was a talk show, and I do remember that in Greensboro being a guest on one of those shows and having a vague memory of that, because it wasn't that far from where we were living in Greensboro at the time. But definitely that was my first introduction to like the TV side of media and all along those lines. And I even had the idea as a youngster that I wanted to be a journalist, so I think that there was incidences of me doing like a mimeograph type newspaper and all along those lines, because that's actually what I majored in Marquette, where I went to college at and everything. So I knew I was going to be into journalism at a fairly young age and everything, even before the parents had the radio station. And some of that was just interest in certain things that were going on in the community, and a kind of passion of my own even before the station came on to existence. But as a teenager, I definitely grew a great love for radio, and I definitely would come back, because even when I was coming back from college, some of the things I would tease about is we didn't have like cell phones and the things that a lot of the young kids have now and all along those lines. So I do remember like mom would come and pick me up at a much smaller RDU, and about halfway through the trip, she would ask me what I was going to be doing that particular evening. And in typical parent fashion, I don't have any kids of my own, but I've seen it with my younger brother, who's now a parent, and some of my friends that are parents, including Brett, who you were just talking to, and everything. They would do the guilt trip, which parents love to do, and everything, and be like, so what are you doing? I'm like, well, it's not like I've called all my friends. It's not like I got a cell phone or anything like that. I think I might have had a pager, and of course we had the phones on the campus, that like the pay phones and other things that you could use and everything. But I was being truthful and telling her that I hadn't called many folks usually. So that's when she would do the guilt trip thing, because it was usually mom. I think it was always mom that picked me up, and she would be like, well, since you don't have any plans, how about I just drop you off at the station? Because I've been there since 6 this morning, and I'm supposed to be there till 9 this evening or midnight this evening. So I'll drop you off. You do the show. And now, because the house wasn't that far, it's like maybe a half a mile down the road. So and then you walk home and we'll have dinner, and the family, meaning you, her, and my dad, and Malik, my younger brother, will eat. But yeah, we'll drop you off at the station. So I sometimes still to this day tease her about that and just bring it up even on some of my own podcasts, because I'm going like, well, it's not like I had tons of friends in the first place. It's not like I had called them and made pre-plans. So yeah, it's kind of like just drop off at the station. I imagine other people that have professions like that got thrown into those situations. Like I've got friends that are owners of stores, and I imagine that they got thrown into like doing the desk work at stores if they were operating a store, whether it's a retail store or whether it's a convenience store or something like that. And I imagine even, because I've had friends in the restaurant and bar industry, that some of the young people, once they get to a certain age and can work, because you can't work in a bar and restaurant until you are able to legally serve, but I imagine that they probably get thrust into some of these jobs as well. So as I've grown older, I've realized that that's probably just something that's the norm.
Yeah, and family businesses for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. So can you tell me a little bit about the format of how the radio show was that your parents started?
Oh, yeah. There's a number of things. I remember there were a couple of shows. Tickle Me Pink, was one of the shows, and I think Jerry Ann King might have started that, and she has had some involvement to some degree with Central, if I remember correctly, and everything, but she's definitely been in the radio space for a number of years, but that was a more younger children kind of show. So it wasn't like Let's Rap was more of a teenage show and everything. And then there was the show that they would sometimes drop me off to do was literally called Featuring. So they would feature, I think that was around 6:30 or 7 or something like that, but it would be like 30 minutes or an hour, and you would just feature an artist and get to know that artist, do it by playing their music. So you might be featuring Thelonious Monk, or you might be featuring John Coltrane, or you might be featuring somebody that was a little bit more contemporary or less more avant-garde, because there were different styles. Because we even had DJs that had interesting personalities. I remember there was one older gentleman that went by the name of Mary's Child, and I think that literally that was his mother's name, so he just kind of kept that as his moniker and everything, and he did one of the jazz shows. But it was a lot of traditional jazz, so they didn't do that much with the smooth jazz. My dad actually had a nickname for it at that time, and I think he's softened his tone on it to some degree, but at the time he used to call it Hodge, which stood for half-ass jazz, so he wasn't a big fan of some of the more popish kind of jazz, like the Miles Davises and some of those that added that pop element to it, and all along those lines. But like I said, I think he softened that stance to some degree, because there's some that I think he at least can tolerate, even though he's probably is and was more of a straight-ahead kind of fan.
That makes sense. So you work with your parents in radio, and you say that you were kind of like doing jobs, so they would kind of throw on you. But did you have a DJ name at that time, or were you not on air with your voice?
No, I was on there with my voice, but I didn't really pick up a DJ name at that particular time, as I recall. Like I said, it was just me introducing myself as was, and just kind of like going with the flow. The Mark the Bluesman Lee moniker kind of created itself when I first came back into VSP. I mean, not VSP, but into NCU, and all along those lines. So that moniker became a later moniker. I don't remember a moniker necessarily there. I do remember there were a couple of clubs that existed in that area. Like there was the Starlight Lounge, which was just down the road, up the road from our house and everything. And there was also Club 43. And we did some events at Club 43, which was on Highway 43. So I do remember doing like some events that at the station. I remember, because we were a rural station, because it was a new thing. I mean, the war is also in Warrenton, and it still exists with WARR and everything. But at the time, we were the new kids on the block, so I even remember us doing like some shows with some artists, and some of these artists are still around, like the Barcades and folks like that, and all along those lines. And there was some doubt, because I think we did it at one of the high schools or the junior high, and there might have been maybe 50 or 60 people at the event, because people didn't believe that they were coming to Warrenton. So like I said, they had that skepticism. So we had a good time, and we enjoyed ourselves. And one of my friends, actually I dated her briefly while I was in college, but she was a member of Saturday Night Live and had a band along with my friend Steve Hyman called Third Generation, which then went on to become, I think the name of the group was Juicy, not M. Tume's Juicy Fruit, but the group was called Juicy, and they had a song called Love's a Merry-Go-Round. Her brother still sings unfortunate and plays. Unfortunately, she passed away not that long ago of breast cancer, if I remember correctly. But she was involved, Catrice Barnes, on Saturday Night Live and a number of other community national shows, because she even played on Roberta Flack and a number of other albums and all those lines. Like I said, we were briefly, might have been a semester, college or summer sweethearts and all along those lines. And I just remember getting that Dear John letter while I was in college, because it's basically like she had nothing wrong with people that listen, but she had a certain religious background and everything. So I think the letter was basically join that church. I'll go ahead and say it was a Jehovah's Witness. She's like basically join that church or we could only be friends. I think I rushed to get to the phone that time, because I mentioned that there were pay phones, and those phones, I was like, okay, we'll just be friends, because I don't think I'm going to be a member of the Kingdom Hall.
It's a whole new thing for you to have to make that transition.
Right.
I understand.
I was like, no, I don't think I'm going there.
So, how far did the radio station that your parents started, how far did it reach?
Oh, it was a 100,000 watt station, if I remember correctly, and it reached throughout Virginia. It reached down to southern North Carolina. It reached in a lot of various places. So we would even get sometimes people that would call in from different places. There was and Dad still has some copies of the magazine, and by the time I talk to you, or maybe I can find some, we have some, because I know there's some online copies of the program guide, because the program guide even described what some of the programs were and all along those lines. But we even had some shows and some reach into the prisons, because we used to get letters sometimes from the prisoners that would be listening to the station and that were enjoying the music, and it was just helping them get through that incarceration time frame and everything. So there was a number of efforts. I think we even did some programs in the prisons as well and everything. So there was definitely some efforts there, because there was a lot of activism work that they were doing. Because if you remember, there was a chemical spill in the late 70s and everything, and that was actually around the time that the station was on the air. So the environmental justice movement started in Warren County, and it was because of that spill. And I do remember my dad and others interviewing some of the people that were fighting against that, what happened with the spill and the way that industry was neglecting by dumping in that area. So definitely there were some powerful stories. And like I said, if you study the history of the environmental justice movement, as they call it now, most people will say that it started in Warren County. So I do remember us going and seeing some of the coverage of that, because I think Dad might even have some of those interviews. And I even remember when the Bradley brothers escaped, and they weren't the smartest criminals in the world, because a lot of criminals aren't smart, but I just remember that they got caught. One of them got caught in New Jersey, because I think they came back to Warren County because they had some beef with one of the gentlemen that helped incarcerate them or help them get caught and everything. But I know the first one got caught because, maybe this is just me thinking logically, that if you're going to be a criminal mindset, I think the first phone that they're going to tap is your parents. So they called him because he called his parents, and they called him while he was eating nabs at one of our corner stores. I'm going like, that was not the brightest move in the world, because that seemed to me that would be the first person that they're going to check on.
Exactly. So how difficult, if you remember, or if it wasn't difficult at all, how much of a challenge, that would be a better word, was it for your parents to start that radio station?
Well, I mean, it took a while, because they had to go through the FCC qualifications. They took them a while to get the license, and of course, everybody at that time had to have the FCC card. I think I had an FCC card at that time as well. Don't know where it's at. It's probably long gone and everything, but everybody had to have their licenses that were doing on-air stuff, and they definitely had to go through the process by going through the application to even be a radio station, and it did take a while. Like I said, we literally came on around the time of independence in 1976, and all along those lines. But it took at least a few years to get the process going, from my understanding, with my parents and all along those lines. And so it was a challenge in that sense, particularly since the way I always describe it is the majority, as I understand it, of nonprofit radio, NPR radio, are usually associated with a campus and or a big entity, like a corporation of some sort or another. We didn't have either of those. We weren't associated with a university. Ironically, after the station went off the air, I think Wesleyan took our signal, or we gifted our signal and everything, and they might still have the signal. That I'm not sure of off the top of my head, but definitely there was a challenge in the sense that we were new players in the game, and we weren't necessarily corporate backed and all along those lines. And in my understanding, part of the reason we went off, and right now we've got people predicting we're getting ready to hit another one, and we've had several since that time, is that we depended on, and Central depends on the same, on funding, but also on support from the community. So we would do like marathons and raise money and everything. And toward the end, after I'd come back, and there had been a few changes in station management. I think Mom had gone to work for Z. Smith Reynolds before working for Golden Leaf. Dad had been a station manager, I think, for a minute. Jerry Ann King, who I mentioned, had been a station manager. But when the times we were trying to raise money, the funding was starting to slide down because people were having tighter economics in the late 80s as well. So in my mind, that's part of what cost us the end of the station and all along those lines. But just like we got some of the supplies from DUR, I think some of our music went to Central and went to other places as well.
Thank you. So how long was it on the air for?
It was on the air. I know it came on 76. I want to say it was off the air about 87 or 88. So about that was on. It was still on when I graduated in college, and I did the 4.5-year plan. So I graduated December of 84, and I know we were on for at least a couple of years after I graduated.
And again, can you remind me what the name of that station was?
WVSP. It stands for Voices Serving People. That's literally what the call letter stood for, was Voices Serving People.
And it seems like it was the community receptive of it as well?
The community was receptive, and receptive in the sense of liking to be involved. There were a number of people that were involved in the station. Some of them have gone on to fame, both here locally as well as nationally, because I don't know how much you've talked to people that are connected with Radio 1, but Gerald Neely was one of the people that we trained, and he was actually on 97.5 for a while, and then he was down in New Orleans. He's been at a number of other places. So there were some people that were trained at the station. We also had Vista workers and some other kind of community groups that would come in and help, because one of the early pioneers in the AIDS fight and all along those lines, he was actually on the cover. That was Warren, and all along those lines, and he was one of the DJs. And literally, I remember after he had left the station, seeing his face on, I think it was either Newsweek or Time, because he was one of the faces of the fight when AIDS first came out, and all along those lines. And then, if you've been following the news lately, you know who Leonard Peltier, who is the Indian activist and everything, and Candace was a person that was very much involved in his struggle to get freedom when that incident first took place way back in the 70s and all along those lines, because she was, I think, from that area, like around South Dakota. So as far as I know, I think she's still involved in that struggle to try to get him freed, and has been for a number of years.
Thank you. So I know that you said that you worked with your parents as far as when you were... Mm-hmm. You graduated high school in between the station, basically still being in operation, right? Mm-hmm. So where did you go for college?
I went to Marquette University, and like I said, part of that was going because of a connection to Durham, because as I said, Howard Fuller was very much involved here, and at that time he was running a program called EOP, and I was a decent but not a super great student. I was probably like a BC, maybe a C, D even student, and everything. Part of that was not doing as much as I probably could have in terms of being as passionate about studies as I probably should have been, and all along those lines. But that being said, I knew that I wanted to go into journalism, and at that time, Central did not have what it has now, which is a very strong journalism program, and along those lines, because I probably could have been a quote-unquote legacy student because of all of the family connections, but I think they did English, but I know they had no media at the time that I was going to school in the early 80s and all along those lines. UNC, because of those only decent grades, it basically put me on the waiting list and all along those lines. So I probably could have waited if I wanted to. But then they came to me and they were like, have you thought about Marquette? And I don't remember if I knew about the basketball championship, because they had won that like only 3 years before under Al McGuire. So I don't remember if I remembered that, but I just knew that I didn't know anything about the area in general. So I was like, so tell me more. And they told me that Howard was running or helping to run the EOP program, which is Educational Opportunity Program, which was for folks that either were not academically gifted enough or had financial woes. And because of the station being a nonprofit, I probably fit into both of those categories and everything. So I said, I'll check it out, and enjoyed the 4.5 years that I was there. Actually did some radio there as well, because I worked on WMUR, which was our campus radio station, and also worked with our campus newspaper as a reporter. But yeah, I did, I think, 2 or 3 years of DJing there. It was a late night show. I think it was like around midnight, because I think it was on one of those corny, like as the trail goes kind of songs that was the ending show, because I think I went off at like midnight and then would go back to my dorm. But it was like one of those, the kind that you would hear like on a cowboy western. I can't think of the exact song, but it was one of those, the trail going on kind of type shows that was the closer on that particular show. And I think that was an eclectic mix of music, everything from music that I like jazz and blues, to rock, to might even been some polk in there for all I know, because it was definitely a very eclectic mix that was there at that particular station.
And where's Marquette?
In Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Oh, okay. So it's way.
Yeah, it was totally opposite of where I had grown up at. And like I said, I have not. Ironically, I'm still active with our campus chapter and all along those lines, but I have not been back since I graduated. And I graduated in December of '84, partially because it's got some very cold weather. I did love the culture when I was there, because it was a jazz club. I think it was called the Jazz Gallery that I used to love going to on occasion. There was another jazz club. That might have been the Bombay Bicycle Club. But I just remember it had a bicycle on something that was downtown. And there was a Park Avenue kind of club and another one called Papagayos. There was like Latin oriented, and both of them were downtown area and near UWM, which is also a campus in Milwaukee. And they had a big festival that they still have. It's still running to this day, called Summerfest. So I've thought about going, because their summers are better than our summers in terms of this heat and all along those lines. So I've thought about going, but either finances or some of my other work, included the Hayti Heritage Center, I just haven't got there. So like I said, graduated 85? This will be almost 40 years, and I haven't been back as of yet, but who knows? Maybe that'll change at some point.
So, did you have a particular discipline that you were following outside of the EOP program? Like, was it a major that you had?
I did have a major. My major was in journalism with a minor in poli-sci. So I actually majored in journalism, and then I had a minor in poli-sci. So that was very interesting, and I thoroughly enjoyed both of those. And ironically, Marquette is a Jesuit university, a Catholic university, but even it has some unusual factors. One of them was I had both conservative and liberal professors, and even though, because it is a Jesuit university, you really have to have two minors as far as I'm concerned, because they require you have the minor that you get, whichever you choose, which in my case was poli-sci. I've always had an interest in political science and all along those lines. And actually, part of that might have been because of Durham, because my dad, and I guess to some degree mom, had created the Malcolm X school here in Durham, along with Howard and other people in that space. But because it's a Jesuit university, and because they want that classical kind of training, where you get to have more of a liberal arts kind of training, and because they're a religious institution, being a Jesuit university, you had to have what I considered almost a minor in theology/philosophy, because I always get it mixed up because it's been so long since I graduated, but it was either 12 hours of philosophy and 9 hours of theology, or vice versa. It's probably vice versa. It's probably 12 hours of theology and 9 hours of philosophy. But if you can imagine, and like I said, parents, but particularly mom's family, was very religious oriented. They were part of connected to Pine Chapel, the family church and everything, but I didn't really have that strong of an interest in that. But I'm going like, well, I guess I'm going to a Jesuit university. I ain't got much choice. So they set the rules and all on those lines. But it was also gave me an interesting contrast, because one of my professors was super liberal. He was kind of like a backer of what people would now call liberation theology, and which is kind of like using theology and activism, using religion as part of your activism. Some people would say Reverend Barber is part of that, and definitely Father Carter when he was in Raleigh, and even Carl Kinney would be part of that as well. And then there was another one that was very super conservative, and I remember that he was the one that turned me on to the screw tape letters, but he was also very ultra conservative in terms of his politics and all along those lines. So I'm sitting there going like, okay, this is a little bit different, but I did kind of roll with it.
Absolutely. So after you graduated from Marquette, what was your next move?
After I graduated from Marquette, I went right practically into the workforce. I think that maybe 3 months after I got out, I went to, roughly 3 months, I went to work in Garner, which is just outside of Raleigh. And I worked for the Garner News, which is a small newspaper. Worked for them for maybe 3 or 4 months. And then after that, I had the opportunity to go to work for the Carolinian, which is the Raleigh equivalent of the Carolina Times. So I worked in that black press from about, I want to say July of 85 to roughly 88. So about 2 or 3 years I worked there and did a variety of stories, everything from covering my friend Robert Comer, who is a comedian, to covering some of the political things that were going on. I even remember doing an interview with We talk about political scandals now, but I remember interviewing, I think, some people that were connected to Gary Hart, who ran for president until he got into one of those early scandals back in the 80s and everything along those lines. So I remember covering his campaign, and I remember, I think it was one of the caucus campaigns as well, and all along those lines. So it was just interesting in getting, and even some of going to do the police blotter and seeing some of the crime stories, and even some of the social groups that were involved, like some of the political groups as well as some of the social groups. Some of the social groups were kind of frustrating because I do remember getting like the, I joke and clown about it now, but they'll send you like the little press release and it'll tell you about all the great things that they did in their meeting and what they ate. And I'm sitting there going like, well, that really doesn't help me because it's not like I'm going to eat it right now, but it'd be like we passed the minutes and it was basically like a minute report is what it amounts to. And for lunch we had. I'm going like, well, I don't know why y'all are telling me this, and I don't know that the readers care. But it was interesting. And like I said, Mr. Gervais and his son actually runs the paper now, if I remember correctly. And I think the grandson is involved as well. But he started something that my editor at the time, Grover Bailey, who I think is still around and everything, was kind of turned it on its ear. Because what he did is he would do what he called a red line, and he would always want the most sensational story to be in the red line. So it would be like the newspaper fold. And I think that Grover would be in a little bit more pragmatic with his journalism style, didn't want it to be so sensational. So he would do the red line, but then he would also make it like about a interesting issue. Like if hypertension was up, it would be a hypertension up in the African American community. So it wasn't the per se sensational story that I think was the original intent of what Mr. Gervais wanted it to be, which he wanted something just to jump out with you with like that sensational headline. But I think that Grover decided to make it a little bit more practical and useful. So still give the red line, as he called it, but give it something that would be more informational.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, yeah. So outside of you working in newspapers, was there a particular time that you transitioned back into radio, or was it kind of like simultaneous?
No, because I did newspapers as soon as I graduated, and I was pretty much in newspapers. I was also doing, and I'm still doing to this day, some event planning. So I'm very much involved in the event planning space and all along those lines. But then with the getting Central on the air is what got me back into radio. Because like I said, Donald Baker is a family friend, and definitely he still talks to my dad to this day and everything, as does some other people there. And Jerry has become a friend of mine. I don't know if he's so much a friend of my dad's, but he's become a friend of mine and everything. So it became more of me just getting involved in there. And then, of course, around that same time, because another institution that's getting ready to celebrate its anniversary, which I'm also part of, is the Hayti Heritage Center. And I was there when the first film festival took place, and Brett was involved with that as well. But that was now celebrating its 30th year. Next year will be the 30th anniversary for the film festival, the 20th anniversary for the Poetry Slam, which I am there for, but less involved in terms of planning. But the film festival, I was very much involved in planning. And then I also went to work at a couple, not just Hayti, but I also worked at the Arts Council and a number of other places. So I got involved in festival work also. So that tied into some of the radio also, because I've been actively involved with Centerfest, which is our Durham Street Festival. I've been actively involved, except for this year, which I did not do for the first time, the Eno Festival, and then I've done the Blues Festival, which we used to have at the Hayti till pandemic and other things caused it to no longer be around. But I've definitely been involved. I was even involved in some of the early days of Bembe and all along those lines. So between festivals, event planning, and even a current project that I've been involved with, I know Brett's aware of, it's called the Road to the Apollo. So we take winners up to the Apollo and have them have success, because we have Captain Newborn, who's the founder of it, kind of created this notion of being able to jump the line. So, and you know, any of those contests, whether it's American Idol or any of those, you got to stay in those lines forever. But he worked out an agreement with the Sutton, so we get to bring our people up and jump the line, and we've actually had some success where some have gotten to the main stage and have done well. I think there's even been some recording contracts that have come out of that as well. So, but in terms of the radio background, it would probably be Central, MUR, which is the radio station, and then VSP, MUR, and then Central. And like I said, part of that was them knowing that I had an interest in blues music, and of course, the Blues Festival came before the station was on the air, because the Blues Festival is going to celebrate its anniversary and everything. But yeah, it was on. It was running before Central came an entity.
Gotcha. So let's talk a little bit more about WNTU becoming an entity. So You had your parents' station,
Mm-hmm.
your experience there, and then WMUR.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get contacted, or what was that process like for you to be a part of that planning committee?
As I remember, I think that Donald had reached out to me, and some other folks had reached out to me as well. But I just remember because some of the meetings were actually not that far from here. I think they were at the Durham Arts Council, as I recall, and there was a number of people that were wanting a station because, like I said, DUR had been here. There'd been a couple of other stations that had existed, but they had no longer were around and everything. So there was a number of folks that wanted that kind of station, and there was a lot of community people that were wanting it as well. Because I think that Bruce Bridges, who had the No Bookstore, was very much interested in having some community activism. Definitely, Brother Youssef, who passed away, was interested in having some kind of ties to the music community and getting some jazz activism going on and everything. So there was a number of people like that wanted to be involved. So as I recall, and I don't remember all of them. Matter of fact, I don't remember hardly any of them except for Donald. And I think my dad was involved in that meeting. But it was probably about 20 or 30 of us that were sitting around trying to figure out what the station would look like and how it would go about. And of course, they were wanting different types of music. I mean, you had some people that were more into the straight ahead, some people that wanted more of the contemporary. They definitely wanted to get some voices for some of the younger voices as well. So I think that's where some of the hip hop shows came out, because I know Mike had a hip hop show as well. Mike Nice. There was the Satterwhites that had a gospel show, so there was an interest in make sure that gospel was represented as well. So they wanted to make sure that a lot of the types of music that are important to our community were represented, and of course they also wanted it to be to some degree a training facility as well. So that was one of the goals, with that students could learn the practicality of by working in the radio as well. So I do know that was part of the conversation also. So I was hoping that there would be some practicality in that sense as well. So that was something that I know a lot of people were very passionate about, because they wanted to make sure that that was able to be accomplished, so they could get those skill sets. And ironically, and I don't know if his name came up with you as well, but did anybody mention Truett O'Neill? Because Truett O'Neill actually created AudioNet, and AudioNet, he's still very much involved in AudioNet and still very much involved in radio with 97.5 and all along those lines. But he would be another person that definitely had that, because he pretty much created the AudioNet, which was the student version of what was going on and everything. So definitely he should be commended for that work.
Absolutely, and he is someone that we are looking to speak with for this project, so thank you for that as well.
Yeah.
Now, when did the planning process begin for WNCU?
Because I know that, like I said, 2001, the station was already on the air at that time. It was already in that area. So I want to say it was like the latter part of the 90s. I want to say like maybe around 96 or 97, and all along those lines that planning process began. I have to look it over some of my old notes, because I think I still got some of those old notes. But yeah, it was a process of wanting Central to have a station presence and all along those lines. And definitely Donald would know more of that physical history than I remember off the top of my head. But I definitely remember, because 2001, like I mentioned, we were literally doing our staff pictures, and I don't think we'd been on that air that long at that particular time of that significant event, because there was even some people that have passed on that are no longer around, that are hopefully if you get by the station, they'll still have some of the pictures. And I know Jerry's got some of the pictures of folks that were involved in the station, because there was even a guy, and I'm trying to think, Barry literally did a show that was done at Duke, one of the Duke performance spaces, like the coffee house that's over there on East Campus, the Arc, I think it's called, or something like that. But he did a variety show, and he was out of the LGBTQIA community, but he did like a variety show that literally was taped live in that, and that had to have been probably in the, that was before 9/11, so that was probably late 90s as well. And like I said, Barry, unfortunately, has passed away, but he was definitely involved in some of the early ones as well. And I even remember there was another gentleman, and I can't think of his name, but I know he was one of the volunteers, and Jerry probably could think of his name off the hand. But I just remember we would sometimes, after doing a late night show, because at that time I was living near South Square, and we would sometimes walk cutting through downtown and other areas, so that we could get to our respective homes and everything. So there was definitely, we would leave the station and head that direction and everything, because there was a couple of incidents that, I mean, it was probably dangerous then, but we weren't thinking about it. We were younger and stupider and all along those lines. But definitely I do remember walking that, and even the one time that I have had a physical injury was when I broke my broke my arm, and that was because of trying to do something to help the radio station, because literally I was doing a lot of volunteer work, and not just for my show, the Blues Show, but others. And I think Jerry had asked me to come and cover. I don't think I was covering him. I think I was covering for somebody else, but to cover for somebody at the station. So I get around a lot by mass transit. And so I remember walking to the old bus terminal, which is now the Durham History Hub. And that probably should have been my first clue, because when I got there, the buses weren't running, which probably should have been my first clue to go back home and not try to do anything stupid. But being younger and stupider, I said, oh no, I'm going to brave it. So I kept on going. And once I got to the other side of downtown near where the courthouse is and made a sharp turn, I literally fell and hit the concrete. So I literally could hear the pop when it happened. And I'm going like, but being a man, I'm being stubborn. I'm like, oh no, that's nothing. That arm is going to be perfectly fine and everything, even though I'm getting fainter by the moment. So fortunately, there was a service area for the county vehicle. So I got there, and they called the EMS, and then my brother and my dad met me there because Mom was out of town. And I remember, my brother is an accident-prone kid. He'll even tell you that and everything. And I just remember him looking at me going like, and getting faint. And I think my dad was looking at him like, boy, you've been in about 10 or 15 accidents. You have seen more than a share of your own blood and everything. And in probably one of the most passionate moments I've ever heard anybody say, whether they were related or not, he looked at my dad, he looked at the doctor, and he looked back at me and he said, y'all don't understand. That's my brother's blood, not mine.
I understand. It's different when it's not your own.
Yeah, exactly. Particularly if you're used to your own risky lifestyle for whatever reasons it might be risky. It's different when you see it somebody that you care about for whatever you care about them.
Absolutely. So as far as the planning process, I think I was reading the history. It said maybe like around 95 when they debuted. Was the plan when you say you wanted the planning committee wanted different genres of music? Did that stick? When they got on
no,
air?
I think that pretty much stuck, and I think it's pretty much stuck now. I mean, the thing that I remember it being different now than currently is that even when Pat Murray came on and some other people came on, there was a lot more, and I think even Brett probably has mentioned this, there was a lot more presence. I mean, there's presence now because I know that Central is involved with the Central Park concerts, and they're involved with a number of other concerts, but it just seemed like there was more presence at like the festivals and some of the other things than there might be now and everything. But in terms of wanting a variety of programs, I know they wanted to reach the Latin community, and there was Latin programming. I know they wanted to reach the gospel community, and there was gospel programming, and there's still gospel programming. I know they wanted to reach the blues community, and I'm not doing it. I understand they still have some blues programming, and I've even been called in, I think as recently as 2 or 3 years ago, to do some of the fundraising with some of the current DJs and all along those lines. So, and they definitely wanted to have the young people's voice put out there, which was mostly the hip-hop kind of programming. So I think that was something that was an intent and still an intent. And then definitely there was involvement with some of the institutions. And like I said, some of them are not around because the Blues Festival isn't around now the way it was. But yes, Central would have a presence there and all along those lines. And I even remember like some more recordings of like taking stuff to different concerts. I think they might have even done some of Brett's open mics way back when and all along those lines. But I don't. You see it, but it's not maybe as much as it used to be in my mind and everything. But definitely that's something that was something that wanted to be done, was to have it be a true voice of the community and all along those lines. And definitely, like I said, there's different styles, and I think that's been a conversation within, because one of the people that just passed not that long ago was Larry Thomas, and I don't know if you got a chance to his other half, Candace, is still around. She's a visual artist and everything, but she's still around even though Larry passed. But Larry was more of a traditional jazz artist and a big fan of like the traditional jazz artists, and there were others that, including Donald Broomfield, who works with me, and we used to work together at COM, which is a community radio station that I was part of as well, because he had about other radio stations I was involved with. After I left Central, I went to work briefly about almost 10 years at WCOM, which is a community radio station in Carberry. And I've even talked to them about possibly coming back. It was after the pandemic because they went fully remote, so they did some shows remotely in 2020, and I did some of those. But then they've talked about possibly, I've asked them about the possibility of coming back and bringing that blues show there, so that may happen in the not too distant future. But I've also had conversations on occasion with folks connected with Central about coming back there as well and everything. So it's always something that's in the realm of possibility, whether it's COM or whether it's NCU and along those lines. But yeah, but I know they wanted the various styles to be represented, including some styles that we may not think about as traditional and all along those lines. Because definitely, I'm trying to think of Susan's last name, because Jerry can tell you her name, but she's still involved in the area, and I think she was involved in like some contemporary rock kind of stuff as well.
Thank you. So, at what point after the planning committee participation did you join the station as a DJ?
I want to say that was maybe about, the station came on around 96, 97. I want to say it was about 2 or 3 years later, because BH was the one that initially, and Jerry can give you the total timeline, but BH is the one who was doing the blues show, and I think that she was also having other responsibilities for the station, like being the one of the, I think she was brought in as one of the, not, because she eventually became the station manager after Donald for at least a minute, or the program director, but she came in and was involved in a lot of different things. So I was her co-host, as I recall, first, and then she decided to pull away from that and pretty much turned it over to me. So I had it doing that time and everything. So I know it was there definitely in 98, 99, 2000, because I'm thinking about some things that were going on in my own life at that time, and definitely 2000 and 2001 for sure. So it was more of a segue kind of thing. So I started off as a co-host, and then they were like, no, things are changing, and so yeah, it's your show now.
And can you tell me a little bit about the format of that show? What was the name of it?
Oh, like I said, the show was called, Blue Monday was one of the titles. It had a couple of different titles, but the main thing that I recall, as I said earlier, was that the listeners that I created that name were the members of the Blues Patrol, and I would make a whole entity about it. So when I would run into them out on the streets and everything, or even on when they'd call in, I'd say, this is so-and-so from the Blues Patrol, and calling in and what they had requested, because blues is a very interesting music, because, a couple of things. One, folks used to get on my case because they could tell what was going on in my social life based on the blues music, until I got smart and realized that I was telegraphing too much, because there were times that I would, like if I was dating somebody at that particular time, and still been all my life in that single space. So if I was dating a young lady and I was mad at her, the I Can't Stand You songs might come out. And if I was very happy about something, the I Love You songs might come out. And so I had a couple of friends that got on my case about that. So I realized that and kind of changed the tone. So even though I was mad at you, I might put out some songs that were friendly and all along those lines. But yeah, there was a time that I was probably telegraphing too much of my personal business while on the radio and all along those lines. So that became a kind of a joke of the community as well. So, and because one of the other nicknames that I have around Durham, and some of my local activist friends gave me that, is because of being so much involved in a number of things in the community, whether it's the Blues Festival or the Film Festival or a number of other things. I used to jokingly think about like left politics, and I would say that, and I would hear like cultural minister from Cuba and places like that, and I would jokingly say that about myself, and then some of my more leftist friends were like, yeah, you're right, you are the culture minister of Durham. So if you look at my Facebook page, you'll see that that's actually a subtitle and everything, because there folks were like, yeah, you do kind of like get around and support the activities going on in the community. So it's a nickname that has kind of stuck with me.
Is that something that you incorporated in your shows, as far as like making the community
I would incorporate making people aware of events that were going on. I would definitely mention the Blues Festival. I would mention things that I was involved in and all along those lines. So I definitely did a lot of incorporating of telling people about what was going on and things that they could be engaged in. A lot of times, and even when Brett started his open mic. That open mic would generally be in the middle of the week and everything. So when I came on Monday nights, I might tell folks about who I had heard or some of the folks, and even some of the people that became friends of mine and that became activists and supporters of the station were people that were on the air that are still very much, well, some of them have passed on, but they were come on as guests. So like I would have Scott Ainsley might come on the show, who is a local blues artist, and he's still around, and the same with Lightning Wells. So they might come on the show. And John D. Holman, who has unfortunately passed away, but he was very much an actor of the Piedmont Sound, he would come in. And the same with Bobby Hinton and a number of others. So I would invite people in to come to the station, and sometimes they would even bring their instruments and play while they were there as well. So there was, I think, Mel Melton, who's played at Brett's Open Mic, and others would come in, and sometimes they would bring their full, not so much the full band, but bring their songs and things of that nature. So even at NCU, a lot of the local artists I became friends with by playing their music. As a matter of fact, one of them is thinking about doing a book of his life, now especially since his wife just recently passed. But Stanley Baird, because I actually told him to get a recorder and all along those lines. So he's thinking about putting his life story down, because he came from Asheville, but was very much involved in the music space as well. So that's something that has been in conversation. But yeah, that's one of the things that I really enjoyed was when the artists would come by, or also when they would drop off music, because I also developed, and particularly at Central, a relationship with some of the distributors and everything. And like I said, there are different styles of blues. Like I am some people call it Southern soul, but it's kind of the more saucy version of blues, and all along those lines, meaning it has a lot of double entendres, and sometimes the double entendres aren't that doubled, meaning that they're kind of very blatant what they're saying and everything. And I was a fan, and still a fan of that kind of music. So it's like the distributor of the record rep for Echo would call me sometimes and would say, I got this record, or I got that record, and can you get it on the air? And so he would drop me off copies on a regular basis. And there were others like Alligator and some of the other major labels like Lion Pig and a lot of the other ones that I would get records from and get them on the station, because I like to have my personal style is I like to have various mixtures of styles. So like I'm a fan of the Chicago style. I don't know if you've ever seen Buddy Guy perform, but even to this day, he's amazing. I don't know when he discovered the Fountain of Youth, but I'm hoping he'll pass it on to all his fans, because he's definitely still very energetic and still able to play well into his, I think, in 80s, might even be pushing near 90 and everything. But if you ever see him perform, he's still got that joy of life and that energy. We've actually had him at the Blues Festival and all along those lines. So it's just good having that kind of relationship and that connection. When they would come by, it was real fun and everything. Because even when there were certain songs that people, if I was on the air, they knew that they would get them. There were certain songs, ironically, one of them just recently passed, that they knew that they were going to get when I was doing my parents' radio station. So even at that time, I was a fan of what some people might call activism music. So at the time that I was doing shows at WVSP, my parents' radio station, there was a good chance that you're going to hear The Revolution Will Not Be Televised by Gil Scott-Heron. There was also, and this is the one that passed and everything not that long ago, there was a good chance, and ironically it fits in on today's weather and everything, because one, I thought she was a good singer, and two, I'm just going to be very honest with you, she and her album cover looked cute. So there was a good chance that you were probably going to hear Angela Bofield, who just recently passed, Summer Days and Summer Nights, because I'm saying nothing else. I'll look at the album cover, and the song sounds good. Good.
That makes sense.
And the same thing even with Central, because there were certain songs, and then some of them were a little bit on the, there were times that sometimes people would call me on them, because sometimes they might be a little bit overly suggestive and everything, because one of the songs I used to play all the time was Vicki Baker's Don't Give Me No Lip, and that definitely has nothing to do with sass. I'll just leave it at that, and your listeners can figure out what it has to do with, but it's definitely a sexual activity and everything. And with a line like above your knees and below the belly button and above your knees, that kind of like told you what the song was about, but it was a regular part of the routine of the songs that I would put in there.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Well, thank you again for that experience. So, what type of audience were you looking to appeal to when you had your blues show?
It was a very diverse audience, because I still got people to this day, both because of the Blues Festival and because of the blues show, that tell me, matter of fact, I just saw one a couple of weeks ago that's like, when y'all bringing the Blues Festival back, because it's not been in physical. The last time we did it was at Hayti itself, and it was a on-campus kind of festival. I think that was the one that we did with Tito Jackson and everything, but it was still in a smaller venue, like it's a 400-seat or roughly theater and everything, and there might have been some outside activities, but it wasn't the same as the homecoming kind of flavor that people love to see when they were seeing it at the old ballpark and everything. But it was a very diverse audience. I mean, I had both young and old, white and black, Latin, all kinds of folks that were listening and everything. And that's actually what I prided the show on being and everything. And I definitely tried to appeal to the different styles, because I know that people have different styles of blues that they enjoy as well. So I would definitely try to play my personal favorites, which is, like I said, Southern Soul, a little bit of the Texas kind of blues, and definitely some had friends who were into Zydeco and the New Orleans sound, and definitely Chicago. But even though it's not my personal favorite style, I knew that there are people that love jump blues, which is more of a San Francisco rockish kind of blues. So I tried to appeal to them, even though it wasn't my personal favorite. So I tried to blend in styles that maybe even I didn't personally enjoy, because I wanted to make sure that I was getting the widest base of the blues community as I could and everything. I'm sure that people that listen realize certain styles that I probably had a greater affinity for than other styles, but they still realized what was what I was trying to do, which is diversify. And it was also fun hearing people that were from other places. I remember one time, I think we at the Blues Festival and just in general, we had Anna Popovich, who is Eastern European blues artist, and we had some that were like from, I think that one guy dropped in that was from like Japan and places. So it was always fun, because there was one blues artist, I can't think of her name, but she was from Australia. But it was good to just find that the blues had such a worldwide community, and to get some of these blues musicians that were from other places and not just the places that we think of as being center blues, which of course is Chicago, Texas, to some degree because of the jump blues, California, and the Piedmont sound, which is the sound that was created here in the Triangle in the North Carolina area. But I even like having New York, because one of my other ones that I used to love playing with Michael Hill's Blues Mob, and they had a song called New York State of Blues, which is definitely more of a New York kind of vibe to it as well. And I used to love playing that song on a regular basis.
Okay, so it seems like you have a wide taste when it comes to the blues music. And I'm from Louisiana, so I appreciate you mentioning Zydeco.
Oh, yeah.
That's one of my favorite genres of music.
Oh, yeah, and Zydeco is real fun, because I even had the pleasure a couple of times of, because with the Blues Festival, Rosie Ledette would come in, and we'd have Clifton and Chenier, and we'd have a number of other folks that would come by the Blues Festival, Nathan and the Zydeco Cha-Chas, and like I said.
And his son is a big Zydeco artist now, Lil Nathan.
Yeah, Little Nathan. And I remember when they were bringing in some of the, at the early parts of hip-hop, where they were bringing in some of the hip-hop component to the blues. So I would enjoy playing like Chris Ardoin and playing Little Brian, that would incorporate some of the hip-hop element into their more traditional blues that their parents or grandparents had done. But yeah, it was real fun hearing those kind of styles, because I remember that from my parents' radio station, because there was the early days of hip-hop, and there was a French hip-hop group, I think it was called Tropicana or something like that, but they incorporated their French style of music into like the hip-hop, and it was just fun in like the late 70s, early 80s hearing that, and I'm going like, wait a minute, so what I have, because foreign language was one of my Achilles heels. We all have Achilles heels when we go to school. Mine was foreign languages and stats and everything, so I know it sounded pretty, but I had no clue what they were saying.
Absolutely. I'm sometimes the same way. When they start putting in that Cajun flair, I'm just like, what? I don't know what that means.
Don't know what it means, but it's good dance music.
It sounds good, absolutely.
As a matter of fact, one of the people that was connected to Hayti and also had some connections to the Blues Festival, and just was a big blues fan, as well as was part of the management team for Baba Chuck Davis and everything, was Norma Dean. And Norma Dean and Ngoma ran the African American Dance Ensemble, but Norma Dean was whenever we would do the Blues Festival, if we didn't have some Zydeco, and I would say the same with Baba Chuck when he was living, they were not happy campers, because they definitely wanted some Zydeco to be part of what was going on.
A bit of dance music.
Yeah. They wanted that dance sound, and even I was talking to Daryl about this one time because Daryl was involved one time as well, but both the radio station as well as the Blues Festival, and he was remembering how we got the Neville Brothers because there was a whole contract thing that we had to arrange it in such a way that we could actually get them, but they were amazing as performers. I think it was the way we had to market it because it couldn't be. I think it had to be the Aaron Neville's featuring Aaron Neville's instead of the Neville Brothers because I think they were going through some sort of contract thing that you had to do a kind of twist to it.
Yeah, it gets kind of complex when you start, switching over into solo careers and the name of your previous group. So I understand that. So you had a lot of experience, whether it was with WNCU or it's your parent station. Just remind me one more time.
No problem. WVSP.
WVSP. I was going to say WPVS, but WPSB. Can you tell me in your own words how you would describe black radio? Since this seems to be like black radio stations.
No, they're all black radio stations for the most part. I mean, with the exception of MUR when I was on campus and everything. I mean, one of the things that I personally get frustrated, I mean, I love black radio, and black radio is doing some amazing things even to this day. And I'm a member, along with Brett, of NABJ and all along, where I sometimes get frustrated by black radio is when it becomes, and I'm not knocking Radio 1 or some of the other ones, but when it becomes too cookie cutter, and that's where I get frustrated with. I get it from a marketing standpoint, but if you go to New York or you go to Chicago or you go down to Atlanta and you go to certain radio stations and you're hearing the same thing all the time, and they're part of our black radio community, that to me can be a little bit frustrating. Not that I've done a lot of national travel. I haven't even done that much international travel, but I'm just saying from my understanding, even when I go online and everything, is I wish that there was a little bit more diversity in terms of what being out there and all along those lines. So that would be my one critique, but I think we're doing a great job in terms of putting our voices out there, and I also wish that we would also be a stronger advocacy voice as well, because I do think that is something historically with black press in general that we used to be very good at, and I don't know that I'm seeing enough of it as I would like to see. I mean, to some degree, there was some of that with Travis Smiley and some of the others, but even their voices have kind of faded and as compared to what they used to be and everything. But I wish that there would be a little bit more of that, and that we would also both listen to the generational divides, because I think that we can learn a lot, both from, because I'm in my early 60s, but I think we can learn a lot from those that are above us. Like I learned a lot from my dad and people that are in their 80s and 90s, but I also think we can learn a lot from those that are coming up underneath us as well. And I don't know I think that they play too much on that generational divide, and there's not enough communications among the generations as there could be, and all along those lines. And even in terms of the mentorship element and everything, because I really do wish that more people would take the time to mentor those that are coming underneath them and all along those lines. Like I said, I have no clue, and part of that is my own fault, whether my nephews, because like I said, I don't have any kids of my own, but if my nephews would choose to go into radio or decided they want to get into radio, I would hope that Malik or somebody would have them. We know your uncle's been into it for ever and a day, so reach out to him and see what he can do in that. And that would go across the board and everything, because one of the things that I pride myself on, because I don't have any kids of my own, as I think of myself as kind of like a elder figure to many folks, including those that are not my own natural kids and everything. Like I love hearing what friends of mine's kids are doing, whether it's like Brett's daughter or whether it's some of my other friends that have got kids that are now in their 20s, 30s, and even 40s. I love hearing what they're doing and any things that I can do to support them, and all along those lines. Even with the Road to the Apollo, one of our teenagers has now had some tremendous success, and she sometimes comes on Coco McMillan's show, which I do every Thursday, and I love figuring out ways to help her thrust her career to the next level.
Absolutely. So it seems like that tradition of mentorship is something that was passed along to you, and you're passing that along to others as well. So that's beautiful. Now, what does it mean, or what does HBCU radio mean to you?
Well, when I think of HBCU radio, I think of a couple of things. One, there are some very strong radio stations that were HBCUs, and unfortunately some of them I fear are being caught up in with some of the struggles that HBCUs are going through right now and everything. Because when I think of HBCU radio in general, there are a couple of stations that I think of in general, and that is, and some of them have ties to Central, ironically, but I think of Howard, because I do know some family, friends, and some people that were associated with Howard Radio. So I think of Howard. I think of Clark has a radio station, if I remember correctly. So I think of them. But I also think about our local stations, and at least one of them, because of the kind of precarious nature that particular school is in, is probably in a precarious position itself. Because when I think of our local radio stations outside of Howard and Morehouse and some of the other ones that are out there, I think of Shaw and St. Aug. And St. Aug is in a very precarious situation just with its own survival at this particular time. So I do worry about it because AUG, WAUG, just like WSAJ, have been very much a part of the legacy of this community and everything. So I do worry about that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we were able to speak with a former, I think he was a manager.
Was it Rashid?
Oh, yeah. Muhammad. Yeah, we were able to speak with him on our last trip to Raleigh. So even though, Shaw, like you said, it isn't in operation anymore, we still are able to talk to some of the people who had a hand in the survival of that station when it was in operation. So
yeah, because and I'm trying to think of his name, because he was actually on Coco's show not that long ago, but he's still involved because he's a program, he's like a promoter and all along those lines, but he was on that station and all along those lines. And I'm trying to think of the gentleman's name, but it begins with a T, but it'll come to me later. But I know he was very much involved in that space as well, and is still promoting artists and all in that space, but he's very much involved in gospel music as well. So I don't know, and there's been some people that were in that gospel community that are now branching out and doing other things, including like some management style work. And I know that the one gentleman whose name is slipping me right now is the one that Coco McMillan has been working with, but he's got several artists from around the country, and he was involved, I want to say, with both Shaw and St. Aug.
That's interesting. It seems like there's a connection between the schools and the Carolinas as well.
Yeah, so there's definitely been a connection with the schools, even in terms of some of the programming and some of the ways that they have worked together.
Mm-hmm. So what is it that you believe makes this particular HBCU community special?
When you say this particular, you mean the triangle one?
Or
NCCU. NCCU? Well, one, it has a very strong creative community that is already there and everything. Even before Central came on, it already had a strong drama department. It already had a strong music department. It already had a strong arts department. And it definitely has a strong roots in the arts just in general. I mean, there's got other programs like, of course, the law program and some of their nursing programs that are in a strong athletic program as well historically, as well as in some sports currently and everything. But in terms of the creatives have been there almost pretty much since I got back. And I got back in the late 80s, and I've seen those creatives be very much involved in the community and in terms of things along those lines. I mean, one of the things that I haven't seen enough of that I wish I would see more of is more of the connections between them, like the connections between that creative community and the existing radio station, like I said, because I don't know. And when I was there, I don't remember any of the drama presentations. I remember some of the sports games being covered, but I don't remember any of the drama presentations being simulcast or aired, or even some of the music concerts. And I mean, they've got an award-winning music program and everything. So that's something that I wish I had seen more of. But like I mentioned to Brett, I've mentioned to some other folks, there are friends of mine that are involved in social organizations. Like my brother's a co-president of the Slingshot Club, but I'm also thinking about like the Black social workers and the Black lawyers. So there's actually a young lady named Benita that's been coming to me and talking to me lately because she is of the opinion, and I partially agree with her, that too often we're in like silos and we don't talk to each other enough and everything. So that's one of her frustrations, that she would like to have not just be a part of the Black social workers, because that's what she is, but also get to know the people that are, say, in the Black fire workers, or the Black Firemen's Association, or the Black Policemen's Association, or even the group that I was a member of for a while, and I guess technically I still am, the NABJ and everything, because unfortunately and it's not just HBCUs, I see, because I live not that far from Duke, I see it even in the PWI schools as well, but you get caught up in these silos, and that even happened to some degree, even though it's starting to improve, where like when my cousin, or one of my cousins, went to Duke, it was almost like pulling teeth to get him to come to Central, even though I lived near Central at the time. I think Malik might have been going to high school at Central, but it was like they were so busy being in that private silo that they didn't even want to come, even though they're not that far apart, Durham, Central and Duke. And so I wish that those silos would be broken.
That makes perfect sense. I can kind of see, the divisions, of course, with PWIs and HBCUs and just the culture that each has and how hard it is to kind of connect it across institutions.
Yeah, exactly. And that becomes an issue and everything, because there have even been some people that central that have gone and done some work. Cause I did a little bit of work briefly with the radio station at Duke, because Duke has a radio station as well, which is XDU, but it's a very low power radio station compared to Central and everything, because it's not designed that way. So it's pretty much on campus, and it's pretty much very avant-garde kind of music, and very much all over the place in terms of their programming, because it's geared that way. It was created that way and everything. But definitely even that, I wish that there would be more of that kind of communications going on, even though I know some people that have done shows at both institutions.
Yeah, so I know you said that you were on air between like the late 90s, early 2000s. Was there any type of world event that happened in the midst of you being on air that maybe impacted you or the station? Or
I'm trying to think, because as I definitely remember some great picture taking events. I also remember that we had the picture of the Harlem jazz folks that were there, and that was a great picture that used to hang up in the station and would just kind of like keep you grounded with knowing that tradition of jazz, because that picture was right there and it was connected to that movie. There was the Harlem jazz movie that was out there, but it was a photocopy of that, so it would keep you grounded just to remember those powerful names, whether it was Nina Simone, or I think Miles was in that picture, or other folks who were in that picture. And then, like I said, definitely being there when 9/11 took place, and I think I was there when a couple of other kind of incidences like that took place as well. So definitely those are things that resonated with me and all along those lines. And of course, it's ironically a lot of times you also remember things because of, as you just mentioned, where you were at those times. So being in that, lack of a better term, being in that single space, and always being in that single space in life. Yeah, I do remember a couple of breakups and non-breakups that took place during that time as well, based on what I said, based on my own actions or lack of action. So yeah, sometimes that would play as well. And it's, definitely I remember some great personalities that I met there as well, and all along those lines. So it was just interesting in having those conversations and getting to know those folks, and some of those are still friends to this day. I mean, Brett's one, but there are a number of others as well that remain friends. I mean, one of my best friends is Ray Pascal, and he was the rental coordinator for the Carolina Theater for a number of years, and we've worked on the road to the Apollo now for about 11 years, and I've seen him go through everything from a stroke right after leaving the Carolina Theater to his own life journeys and everything along those lines. But we stay in regular touch, and ironically, me, him, and Brett used to go regularly down to the American Black Film Festival, because we used to love going down there in its early days. We haven't been down there probably in about a decade or two, but it was just fun going down there and watching it and everything, and just to show you how time flies, and how, because both me and Ray teased Brett about it, because we knew that he had the background in TV and all along those lines. And you would think that a TV guy would always have his camera. Mm-hmm. And one of the incidents that we talk about is way back before there was even an idea of a Bronny. LeBron James was recruited by his first team, the Cleveland Cavaliers. And I just remember that we had gone down there to one of those early days in Miami, because it's been down in Miami now for multiple decades. And we went to one of their popular Miami nightclubs, and there was a very tall bouncer that was there, and we saw LeBron, as he had just been signed, coming to try to get into the club, and there was a bouncer that was there that was probably equally as tall as LeBron, but was also very much dressed in women's outfits, because he was a drag gentleman and all along those lines. So we just remember him basically being challenged by LeBron's handlers and all along those lines, and he proceeded to take off his jewelry and take off his everything else, and was getting ready to maybe not so much confront LeBron, but confront some of LeBron's handlers. And to this day, we tease Brett, because we're going like, of all the times for you not to have a camera, when you know that the National Enquirer is just down the road, this would be the time that we needed the camera. But there was no camera to be sit for us to get our claim to fame and our quick dollars and
Yeah.
everything. But because Brett did have his, I think he had his regular camera, but I don't even think that was with him at the time because we were going into a nightclub as younger men. I think we were like, what, that would have been probably in, if we're 60s now, that's probably been like late 30s or early 40s and everything. And we're going like, of all the times not to have a camera.
And that's the time you needed it the most.
Yeah.
I understand that. So how long were you with WNCU for?
I want to say because though I was at COM for about 10, 11 years, and I want to say Central was longer. So Central was probably about 96 and 97 through like at least 2010. Because let's see, 2000, because I just came off of 2020 is when I did the first virtual year of COM. So let's say 2010 to 2020. So it's probably like about 2008, 2007 was when I had left Central. And ironically, and I could probably still find some of those online and everything, I still have some of my, because I would post them online, but I would also keep them on my email. So I know for a fact, matter of fact, I just saw one, so I know one of them was 2008. I still have my playlist.
Oh.
So I still have the playlist of the shows that I was doing at Central and everything. So I still have at least probably in my email files a good 75 to 100 episodes of the shows that I was playing, and I might even have on some of those shows quotes because like if somebody was requesting a song or something like that, I might have even typed those in the emails, like this one was dedicated to Lon, or this one was dedicated to so and so, because there were certain ones that were regulars that would call in all the time. Like there was and then there were people that I would see, like Sam Sellers used to own, and which I'm sure Brett mentioned, the Talk of the Town and everything like that, and which was one of the original open mic locations. And there was two brothers, and I think they owned a barbershop if I remember correctly. But I remember they both passed on. But I would come in and they'd be like, "Yeah, I remember you were just playing so and so, and we loved that song. Can you play it again next week?" And everything. So they were part of the Blues Patrol as well, because they were definitely regulars that would listen all the time and everything. So definitely there were folks like that. And there's some people that are still around. Rhonda Robishaw is still around, and she's a New Orleans style blues musician that's here in the area. So she still is here, and I played some of her music. Like I said, Mel, I played his music on a regular basis. He's still around. Scott Ansley is still around. And there were even folks that I would slip them in, even though they didn't quite fit the total style, like Dex Romweber, who was more of a rocker, even though he had some blues songs and everything. But I would play some of his stuff, and I think he just recently passed as well, if I remember correctly. But then there was other people that were out there that I would play that might not quite, because I think there might have been one or two times that I slipped in a John Howie, and John Howie did Creepers Jeepers. He did the soundtrack for that, but he's a local, more country kind of singer and everything, because he was part of a group called $2 Pistols. So it was more of that kind of, it's not straight country, but it's kind of like that twang type country that's more popular in this area and everything. Kind of a rockish country sound, I guess is what I would describe it as. But his other claim to fame is that if you ever watch that cult classic Jeepers Creepers, he did the soundtrack for both 1 and 2. So if you hear that music, and he's a local artist.
That makes sense. Then people are always talking about the 23rd summer, so I'm always laughing because of Jeepers Creepers, they talk about the 23rd summer.
Sure.
Absolutely. So it seems like you had about a 10-ish year career at WNCU.
Right.
Since you leaving that station, how have you found that HBCU radio stations have changed? Or if they haven't, then that's fine as well.
No, like I said, it's been interesting watching the style kind of journey and everything, because I think that there was a time that they might have been more open to the different styles and all along those lines. And I'm trying to think if I've heard as much even the spectrum that exists and everything, because right now, even in the jazz community, you've got those that are very much smooth jazz heads and love the more contemporary kind of music and everything, and then you've got those that are more of the traditionalists and everything. So I do sometimes wonder how much of the history element are we getting from even those folks that are listening to it, whether it's young people or whether it's old people or folks along those lines. So I do sometimes wonder about the history element of it and how much of that is being covered and talked to, and also how much are the artists, how much are the people learning about the predecessors and all along those lines. Because one of the things that I am fascinated by sometimes is when you, and even Desan, who's one of our spoken word legends here in the area, he talks about it in some of his lectures. If you think about spoken word music and even some of the hip hop, a lot of that, even the true connoisseurs of it will acknowledge the jazz history and the blues history, but then I sometimes wonder if we're having enough dialogue about that so that if people hear, say, a Common song, do they realize that one of the riffs might be from a Miles song or something like that? So I do sometimes wonder if enough of that communication is going on. And also we're acknowledging some of our own legacy people, because one of the people that I know that Brett knows, and I think he might have even been involved to a degree in the early days of Central, is Chip Sharon. And if you know anything about the legacy of hip hop and the whole some of the songs that existed, including it wasn't Grandmaster Flash, but it was one of those songs. He actually did the bass line, Sugar Hill Gang. He did the bass line for the Sugar Hill Gang and all along those lines. But I mean, I don't even know how many people here in Durham realize that, even though he's a Durhamite. I mean, he went to school here in Durham, and I don't even know how many people in Durham realize that and give him that kind of connection to that legacy. And he's still out there performing. I mean, he's based pretty much out in the West Coast, but he's still out there performing on a regular basis.
Yeah, and then he played a pivotal role in one of the first hip hop songs that came out.
Right, exactly. One of the first hip hop songs, and I mean, that bass line is.
It's notable.
It's almost as notable. It's almost as notable as the song itself.
Exactly. I'm that type of person where I listen to like bass lines and see how like unique they are, and you know, when you first hear that bass line, you know what song it is.
Yeah, you know
without the lyrics.
You don't even know the lyrics. You automatically know what's going on, and even the history with that, because people act as if the whole notion of the disses are new, but even the jazz guys would be dissing each other and playing the dozens with each other, and now they might have been doing it with musical notes, and sometimes they even did it verbally, but it didn't get the same kind of notoriety as some of these current diss songs do and everything. But I'm going like, that's nothing new. They've been playing the dozens even back in my dad's day, and even his granddad's day. They were playing the dozens, but I don't know that people make that connection between the fact of what is happening now versus what was happening then, because a lot of times we're not really reinventing the wheel. It's already been out there, and it's just a matter of us following the lines of what happened and understanding that it's what's that old saying? There's really nothing new underneath the sun, and a lot of the things are very much still out there. I mean, there was even folks in the communities that didn't necessarily like each other. Like even some of the jazz greats weren't the best of friends and everything. And of course, even some of the eels of society that we talk about hip hop, those same eels were eels that blues artists faced and the same eels that jazz artists faced and everything. I mean, how many jazz artists are out there? I mean, I mentioned Larry in his book about Lester and everything, but I mean, a lot of them were facing those same drug demons that the hip hop artists are facing, and even some of the mental illness stuff. I mean, one of the people that I know, there was a local guy that wanted to do a movie about him, but I mean, Charles Mingus was actually even committed at one point and everything, so people don't even think about that because they act as if some of these things are modern and new, and I'm not saying that they're not modern, but they are also part of the tapestry of our history.
Absolutely. Thank you, and I appreciate hearing about that because, like you said, it's good to know the origin of what it is that we listen to in these days come from, and not only what we listen to, but who was kind of participated in the process of putting that into the airwaves and music in general.
Yeah, just music in general. And like I said, that's even some of those conversations, because like I said, even before he passed, one of the things that I used to love at my parents' radio station was Brother Youssef and Freeman, who's passed as well. But a lot of these jazz greats would come up to the station and would actually be there doing fundraisers and doing the fundraiser concerts in the station and sometimes in a venue, but they would also be there and you would get a chance to hear their experience working with some of the greats, because they weren't just greats themselves, but in some cases they had worked with some of the national and international greats. It was just good to be in that presence and to hear their stories and everything. Because one of the things, and that's why I'm glad y'all are doing this project, that I get frustrated by, because I'm one of the historians for the Hayti Center, and I bring it up in even some of the lectures that I do, is that too often by the time that we decide to catalog it, the people that you can catalog it are already gone and everything. Because I think about like like we had Dick Gregory a long time ago at the Hayti Heritage Center, and as far as I know, if somebody recorded it, it would have been Jim Fields, who I know Brett knows as well. But I don't know that his family has the tapes, and I know we don't have the tapes. So in a lot of ways, that's just totally lost conversation. I mean, I can remember that he was there. I can remember that he talked about a lot of things that he talks about, which is vegetarian. I mean, being a vegetarian and being healthy and some of the political conspiracy things that he had talked about when he was living, but without a physical documentation. Like, I don't even remember there being a newspaper article, because I've been trying to go back and look for them. But I don't remember there being a newspaper article or a physical documentation. So a lot of it is the memories that you have, and you hope that you remember them as best as you can, but there's not the physical documentation. So that's one of the things that I try to encourage. Like, I just did one with Duke, and we also had the last Duke basketball team come by Hayti, is to actually, if they keep those papers, to make sure that they don't lose them and everything. Because there've even been documentations, including some of the things I've been part of, including some of them we've been talking about, that some that I've kept and I know where they are. Like, I can dig into my emails and find those playlists that I was talking about, and I probably can find some of the planning meetings. But, you know, through life we switch, just like people switch cars. I don't like I get around by bus, but people switch cars, or they switch houses and everything. We also switch computers, and we switch our notebooks, and we switch everything else. So a lot of that winds up getting lost in the shuffle. So I know that there are valuable documents that have been lost in the shuffle, not just in my life, but also in my parents' life, that we hope that we can find them or remember them, but they're so lost in the shuffle that all you can do is just try to recollect it as best you can.
Thank you. So, what kind of lessons have you learned working in radio, whether it was at Marquette or with your parents or with WNCU? What type of lessons have you learned?
Oh, a couple of things. One, I think that radio has definitely gotten me to learn a lot about different aspects of different views, because not everybody that I have talked to, whether it's been at Central's radio station or even at COM, or even my parents' radio station, or even some of the things I'm involved with now. Like I said, I'm part of a podcasting network, and I've been part of that now for going on 5 years and everything. But I don't always agree with the folks, but I love learning about people, even those people that I may not agree with and everything, because I think you can learn from anybody, whether you agree with them or not. I mean, one of the interviews, I don't know how much you follow conspiracy theorists or conspiracy theories and everything, but one of the first interviews that I did, and they say it's one of our biggest interviews that I did at Pod TV, well, it used to be called IBM TV, that's the podcasting network that I'm part of and everything, was with Ole Damagard. And I can tell you that half of the things that Ole Damagard said, because he's very much into that whole, the deep state and the whole Illuminati kind of conversation and everything, and also some very terrestrial kind of things. And while I can understand the logic of what he was saying and everything, I would not say that I probably didn't believe half of what he said, but I also love giving people the opportunity to present their side of the story and let the people make the judgment as to whether they want to believe them or not. So that's just kind of my own philosophy of life, is I will present the information, and then y'all can make y'all's judgment as to whether you agree or disagree with what they say. But I can just tell you, as one that's doing this interview with you now, that, yeah, I don't remember all that he said, but half of them sitting there going like, I could challenge him, but I'm not going to challenge him, because that's not my job at this particular time. I'm going to let him state his facts, and those that are watching it, they can make their decision whether they buy it or not.
Absolutely. So another segue question from that one is, being that you've learned certain lessons in radio, what type of wisdom or advice would you pass down to people who have a desire to join the new generation of radio broadcasting, specifically HBCU radio?
One of the things I would say is definitely get involved, because I think that a lot of times with HBCU radio and just radio in general, we are too quick to be scared to go for what we want to do and everything. And I think that that's one of the things that I talk about regularly on my personal podcast, is the notion of the imposter syndrome and the notion of the our own inner voice and how we can talk ourselves out of things and everything. Because one of the things that I oftentimes say is, I know for a fact that there have been jobs, including some jobs in artistic management and jobs in events and things, that I have not gone for. And just like I said earlier, I know that there have been relationships that I have not pursued because I have been too busy having that inner conversation with myself. So one of the things that I would say, and I try to say it to everybody, in general is, yes, understand why you do what you do and understand the passion for your reason for having the passion, but at the same time, don't get out of your head sometimes, because sometimes we could be too busy getting in our heads, too busy that we overanalyze. There's this notion of analysis paralysis, and I know that in whether it's social life or whether it's professional life or a number of other type of things, I have done that analysis paralysis to death and everything. Because one of the things that I tease, and if he's, well, I'm sure he'll hear this because you're doing it with him and everything, but that's one of the things I even tease Brett and even some of my other friends about is I have offered them chances to be on podcasts and other things, and they usually will give me all the reasons that they can't do it versus going ahead and just getting it done and everything, because I think they're too busy. And I know we're all busy, and I'm not saying that they're not busy as well, but we can also do that analysis paralysis too much that we actually miss those golden opportunities and all along those lines, because I've was teasing Daryl, and I brought up Brett as well, because I'm like, I've offered both of you as well as others chance to do a podcast, and y'all are sitting there telling me all the reasons not to do it, and I'm going like, well, just don't give me the reason not to do it, just go ahead and do it. If you don't like it, we can do it later and everything. But I do think that we sometimes get into this notion of, and I get it, because I mean, to a lot of ways, we are all, to some degree, want things to be perfectionists and all along those lines, but there is no such thing as true perfection. Maybe if you are a religious person, maybe those people that were around in the days of Jesus, but even they, I don't know, were total perfectionists and all along those lines, because one of the things, and some people might say that this might get me in trouble with my religious friends and all along those lines, but I would sometimes say that the part of the Bible that I wish that we had, that we don't have right now, is, I am sure, this is just my theory, and I could be wrong, but if Jesus was born as a baby, I don't know any baby yet that isn't cantankerous. So I'm thinking that when I think of the Lost Scrolls, that's what I want to see. I want to know, what did Mary do when she was yelling at Jesus? Because like I said, I know that he is, according to the Bible, he's the epitome of perfection, but even if you're the most perfect baby, you cried.
Yeah, exactly.
So
that's a good point.
So that's the part that I want to see. I want to know, like, when he was crying as an infant, what did Mary do to calm him down? Like, did you sit there and did you rock him? What did you do to calm him down? I'm not saying that he threw a temper tantrum, because I don't see from my understanding of Jesus, I don't think he was throwing a temper tantrum. But at the same time, I just want to know, because I'm sure that at some point he had to be crying. So what did Mary do to calm him down? Maybe it's just like something as simple as a rocking chair. I know that the notion of the boat and because there's a scene in the Bible, I can't remember it, but it's like she's got him in the
in the storm.
Right. And so that's what I'm kind of like wondering is what was going on during that time and everything.
Right. No, that's a good point. Something to definitely take heed of. I'm going to have me interested in trying to do research on if there's any conspiracies behind that, too.
Yeah, who knows? There might be, but that's just what I sometimes wonder. But yeah, I just sometimes think that outside of that we get too much into our heads and all along those lines, and we find reasons not to do it. So to those people that are thinking about going to it, because I mean, a lot of times we also we have a tendency to make assumptions, and sometimes those assumptions have nothing to do with reality and everything. So I just wonder, and I don't know this because I do go on campus because Dad doesn't live that far from the campus on occasion. As a matter of fact, I was just there not that long ago because I went to Juneteenth. I left Haytown, walked down to Juneteenth. So I was literally across from the track on about a month ago and everything when the Juneteenth celebration was going on. But I wonder how many students that are interested in radio and walk by the station and just assume that it's not for them and therefore don't inquire. So that's what I wish more students would do. If you have an interest in radio, if you want to, or you want to be on air, just knock on the door and talk to the folks that are there and see if it's even a possibility. And maybe it's not that you're on the main station, WNCU. Maybe it's that you go to AudioNet, or maybe it's something else. I also sometimes wonder about the relationships between the entities there, because right after, many years after Central came on, the TV station was introduced, and I don't know how much of the activities and communications go on between the TV station and the radio station, because we're going to have a radio/media program. It seems to me that in my mind they should be communicated on a regular basis, but I don't know whether that goes on, because one of the things, and just as a side and along the lines, is because Hayti Heritage Center, it looks like a church because it was a church. There are many people, including many of our new neighbors that are moving down in those apartments, including people that are literally behind us, that I think assume it is still a church because they haven't gone and knocked on the door. Because like I said, as the historian, one of the things I love is when people come and it's like, I've lived here forever. I didn't even know y'all did this or that, and all along those lines. So it's always interesting, and I think about how many people literally are in the neighborhood that don't even know what goes on in their own societies and everything. And that's even what I see sometimes with HBCUs and Central in general. Is I think that too often, coming back to the silos, we get caught up in the silos, because I really wish that whether it's Hayti or whether it's NCU, that there would be a greater effort to communicate with the students that this exists on your campus and it is here for you if this is something you are interested in and everything. I mean, I don't want them to come in and totally change it into what it was not originally intended for. So I don't necessarily think that we have to have it become like a modern day version, or a modern day version of 97.5 and a modern day version of QOK. But I think you can still maintain the integrity of its history and still encourage people to get involved.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. You just spoke to me with that bit that you just gave.
That I wonder is, coming back to the musicians, is how many of the musicians are actually using the HBCUs and other formats to get their message out. I mentioned earlier the blues guys that used to drop me off tapes and they would come by and do stations, and I even have, do shows and everything, but I even have friends that are involved in everything from gospel to rock, and in various cities, whether it's Kansas City, Nashville, LA, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. And I wonder how many of them are actually reaching out to their local stations and trying to get their stuff into those stations. Because I think a lot of times people are so busy trying to get into the mainstream press that they forget the lesser press, whether that's internet radio or whether that's college radio or a number of other things. They're so busy trying to get on, the big stations like the BLS up in New York, that I don't know that enough of our artists are thinking about the stations that can also help them get noticed as well.
Absolutely. So is there anything that was not mentioned in this interview that you would like to add before we close, or anything that you want to shout out? I know that you mentioned that you have a podcast, so feel free to shout that out for anyone who's listening to be able to listen to you more on your podcast.
Oh, no problem at all. Like I said, definitely if you get a chance, usually on Wednesdays, but I arranged it to not do it today and everything. But the online dinner party is usually Wednesdays from 4 to 6 and everything along those lines. I'm also part of their new show, which is the World Edition, Monday through Friday at 10 to 11. And my good friend Jatovi, who is also the voice of the on-the-field antics for the Bulls, the Hurricanes, and today he's doing a cricket match. So he just added today third sport and everything, but he is one of the announcers, along with Shaquille Latimer and Rick Rosner, who was a former Jimmy Kimmel writer. So we talk about news events every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m., and then we also have world politics and 5 o'clock on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I produce a number of shows for some folks like Misfits Managed, which is about kind of like nerd celebration and how we can actually not celebrate our differences and all along those lines. But that is done by two friends out of Kansas. Coco has her show every Thursday at 6 o'clock. We have an interior designing show, but if they go to podtv.tv, they'll see a bunch of those shows, including a show around chess, a show, ironically, with a young lady out of New Orleans, that with Shreveport, Baton Rouge area, that is doing a show around like the black woman's voice and everything. But that is called the All Around Show, and it's also about education because she is a teacher in D.C., even though her family is in the Baton Rouge area. So she's very much in that area and very much a outspoken advocate for black woman magic and everything. So she definitely does that show regularly Monday at 6 o'clock. So me and her have back and forth conversation because she usually introduces me as the producer, and we'll just talk about all kinds of issues, including what's going on with Biden and Trump and all along those lines. And she's definitely very adamant in her views. She doesn't hold back any punches and all along those lines. So that's one of several shows that I do, and that's just with Pod TV. I also produce some folks that have separated from Pod TV that have their own show. So like my good friend Zach Robertson does a show about funk music, and he's been at Brett's Open Mic, but that's every Saturday afternoon at 12 o'clock on his network, which is Nine on the Grind TV and everything. And then I've also helped some friends with their business conferences. One with social workers that I did last year, hoping to do it again this year. And then Eric Kelly that does a business expo that he's been doing now pretty much during the pandemic. He used to have a physical one and all along those lines. So there are a number of shows primarily for Pod TV, but a couple that are separate from the Pod TV family as well. So, and if anybody is interested in anything that I can do to help, because like I said, networking and connecting is what I'm all about. It's what I've been all about pretty much since being born and everything. So anything that folks want to reach out to me, they can reach out to me at bluesradio@gmail.com, and I would love to sit down and anything that I can do to give them insights or encourage them in any way that I can, I would gladly do that. But it's bluesradio@gmail.com. They can also hit my Hayti email, which is mlee@hayti.org. But the best one is the Blues Radio one.
And do you have anywhere on social media where people can find you?
Yep, they can find it. Well, Pod TV is all over social media. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're on LinkedIn. I've been having some issues with LinkedIn. So my own LinkedIn has been having some issues that I'm trying to get situated because unfortunately social media has its dark side as well and everything. So it got a little hijacked on my LinkedIn. But Instagram, they can find me on Lee Entertainment 62. They can also find me on Facebook. I think that's under my name if they just type in the name. But I'm always posting pictures of events that I'm at as well as guests because I try to get a picture of the guests and post them on the Instagram. So it's Lee Entertainment 62, and they can definitely find me on that. And if they type it up on Facebook, if they can't find it under their name, if they type up Cultural Ministry of Durham, it should be the only one that comes up and all along those lines. And like I said, friends of mine that were, because I was part of Occupy, and including people that are in our current city council, like Jillian Johnson, they kind of came up with that nickname for me, and it's one that folks will run across me and even say it to this day. They'll be like, there goes the cultural minister there. Wonder where he's off to.
Well, thank you again for that. Well, Mr. Lee, if there's nothing else that you would like to add to this interview, I would like to personally thank you on behalf of the HBCU Radio Preservation Project for your willingness to participate in this interview and to document your experiences with WNCU so that we can continue to preserve your story.
No problem. Glad to do it. It's definitely a great conversation, and you did a great job, and I'm definitely looking forward to hearing the results of it. And like I said, hopefully you'll reach out to some of those other names that I mentioned. I can actually put you in touch with Jerry Carter because I talk to him regularly, and I know he's been talking about this notion of even trying to get a black radio initiative to going, because that's one of his current projects that he's hoping to do, is to get a initiative and even have like maybe some programming done where it's kind of like distributed to various black radio stations around the country and everything. So that's an initiative that he hasn't finalized, but I know he's been talking about it, and it's like a dream project and all along those lines. But he's definitely an innovator, just like Jim Lee, my dad, is, and Jerry is, and there are a number of other great innovators as well.
Well, thank you again for all that you have shared with me on today, and again, we appreciate your participation.
No problem.